So what does the workflow look like to build a special language corpus for terminology extraction and subject matter specific bilingual or multilingual glossary creation? First, a special language corpus of technical texts written by subject matter experts who speak the language of the corpus as their mother language is compiled. The audience of these technical texts are other subject matter experts. Now, think for a moment about this. Think about how authors who speak the language of a corpus as a mother language might be determined. As I state in the article, Getting Started with Terminology Management, published in the ATA Chronicle, when identifying texts written by so-called native speakers, a major challenge and source of bias is the use of stereotypical identification methods that too narrowly define who gets to be considered a native speaker. For instance, a person with the last name Smith may or may not speak English as a native language. They may also speak Spanish as a native language or any other language spoken on the planet. Assuming who a native speaker is based on superficial data like people's names does not and should not suffice for professional terminology work. Next, think for a moment about why the audience of the text included in the corpus might be important. Remember that we're looking for texts written by subject matter experts for subject matter experts. Subject matter experts writing for a general audience will use simpler terms to explain really complicated concepts because they know that their audience won't understand the complicated terms that they would use to speak with other subject matter experts. So they'll avoid overly technical terminology that they know a general audience would not understand. Therefore, texts written by subject matter experts for a general audience do not reflect the specialized terminology used by a discourse community of a specialized domain. Texts written for other subject matter experts in the discourse community will use specialized terminology and therefore are good candidates for a corpus. Next, during automatic terminology extraction and human validation, frequently used special language will be filtered from the general language in the corpus. So essentially, whether you're using a software program to do this or if you're going through and manually doing the extraction as a human, you'll go through and you'll identify the general language or language that is used in common speech from the specialized language. Extracted term candidates are then analyzed by a human practitioner who removes the results that represent noise and adds any terms missed from during the extraction that would constitute silence. In this context, noise means over-generated invalid data in single word and compound terms. So words that just happen to occur together or happen to occur frequently but are not actually terms. And silence refers to under-generated results in single word and compound terms. So omissions are an example of silence, exemplified in the phrase heart and lung disease, in which the repetitious use of disease has been omitted, so that a phrase actually occurs to heart disease and lung disease, but a machine might not recognize that. Next, extracted terms are arranged into concept systems which indicate the relationship and meaning among terms. And the same workflow steps outlined previously are completed for all of the language for which a glossary is being built. This can be completed simultaneously. Source and target concept maps are compared so that areas in which definitions are not an exact match can be documented and then taken into account when the glossary is applied during translation, so that a translator is aware where concepts are not 100% matches so they can implement solutions into the translation to account for that. Or so that the definitions can be adjusted as necessary if you're working on coining terminology to achieve correspondence in terminology and concept relationships among multiple languages. While this is a best practice to prevent concept systems from one language being imposed upon the conceptual structures of another language, An unfortunate tendency in our industry is to think of glossary building as a process of translation, where source terminology is simply translated into the target language. Treating glossary building as a process of translation rather than as a process of independent linguistic analysis in 2 or more languages in order to truly understand and navigate the systemic differences among languages is a sign of linguistic immaturity and unquestionable ethics, whether consciously or unconsciously, since the conceptual systems of lingua francas, such as English for the United States or Mandarin Chinese, tend to be imposed on languages with less speakers. So in terminology management, the words source and target really should be avoided in order not to imply that the linguistic and conceptual structures of one language are more important than another. Once terminology has been validated and non-terms have been removed from a list and terms that are indeed terms have been identified, more information is collected about those terms and the terminology is collected into a glossary entry for each concept.